Hi everybody and good afternoon. My name is Toni Maria Fischer and I will be doing my final application video on our sociological theorist, George Herbert Mead. I decided to do my final application video on George Herbert Mead because I was able to really find his core ideas and his sociological theories very interesting. Within the text, his first core idea is on pragmatism, and George Herbert Mead was not the only founder of this, but also was John Dewey, Charles Peirce, and William James. And pretty much pragmatism is really interesting because this core idea was not designed to uncover the principles of human behavior. It was actually designed more as a technique in order to study human behavior and how humans interact and how they adapt and everything along that line. The next core idea that George Herbert Mead did have was actually called behavioralism, which is also known as social behaviorism. And this is actually quite interesting because he did believe that an individual could develop images through interactions with people and with society and everything along that line. And that pretty much how social experiences creates and can create someone's self-personality and self-identity, which is actually quite interesting. And actually, in my next slide, I can also show and explain how his theory is now being incorporated with movies. The movie Inside Out is a great example of George Herbert Mead's core idea on behavioralism, especially and specifically pointing out the move the family makes to San Francisco, for example. Once they move to the city, the little girl, everything's changing for her. Her atmosphere dictates the way she feels and helps her realize that even though she's moving away, everything might be okay. Because of the new beautiful city, it's different, it's new, it's exciting. And then reality sets in as she goes up to her new room in her new house and starting her new school. She realizes that she's not okay, and her state of mind actually becomes a representation of her surroundings. She realizes that it's not what she's used to. It's not her home. And this is a good example because it can show you how her behaviors and her surroundings are all coming together and how that surrounding is now affecting her behavior and perfecting and affecting her personality. George Herbert Mead's third core idea was called evolutionism, and his theory or core idea actually stems from Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. So George Herbert Mead thought evolutionism had something to do with and went along the lines of symbolic interaction with ourselves, other people, other individuals, as well as our environment in which we live in. In a line with, he also brought up something called social progress that also needed accommodating in evolutionism for both individual creativity as well as social control. One of George Herbert Mead's social theories is on the mind, and the mind he pretty much summed up as a behavior that allows the consciousness to control one's actions, and he believed that could be done through symbols or by using language. And when he explained or said the word symbol, he stood that as a meaning pretty much, and he was defining the term meaning as a threefold relationship, which is in between a person's gesture, the response to the gesture by another individual, and competition of the social act between the person who gives that gesture and the person who is receiving it. He also likes to bring up in regards to this, which I have in the PowerPoint, and it is significant symbols. And those are pretty much words and gestures that have the same meaning that are involved within a social act. And lastly, I believe what George Herbert Mead was most known for was his theory on self. It is quite interesting, and he made a lot of good, valid points within his articles and books in the text. So pretty much self, he was explaining, is that it's not evident. Someone doesn't know who they are at the time of birth or their adolescent years, but over the course of time. And self emerges through social interactions. And to have a better understanding of self, it can be broken down into a couple different parts, and he has it explained as I, me, and the generalized other. So the I and the me is the social self, and the I is the response to me, is how he explains it. And the self develops through 3 different stages. And the first stage is, and lastly, I believe what George Herbert Mead was most known for was his theory on self. It is quite interesting, and he made a lot of good, valid points within his articles and books in the text. So pretty much self, he was explaining, is that it's not evident. Someone doesn't know who they are at the time of birth or their adolescent years, but over the course of time. And self emerges through social interactions. And to have a better understanding of self, it can be broken down into a couple different parts, and he has it explained as I, me, and the generalized other. So the I and the me. The me is the social self, and the I is the response to me, is how he explains it. And the self develops through 3 different stages. And the first stage is called the play stage.